Good day, I'm Gerard Botha. The purpose of this video is to familiarize you with a guide for municipalities on processing embedded generator applications 1 megawatt and larger. We will discuss the content at a high level and go into more detail in later videos for each section. This video contains an overview or introduction to the document. Then we discuss the content of each of the three sections. There is a checklist for distributors' use to ensure that all requirements are met, and this is briefly introduced at the end of the video. The document is primarily intended to support municipal distributors with assessing applications for the connection of generators 1 megawatt and larger. However, it also provides useful information to prospective generators or customers regarding what is permissible, and advises on the various criteria and processes that are involved in considering generator connection applications. The intent is to cover all processes to be followed, but some aspects may not be covered in detail since they may already be in place or covered elsewhere. For example, regulatory approvals for rights of way, land use, etc. There is a disclaimer. It remains the responsibility of all guide users, both distributors and prospective generators or customers, to make sure all regulatory, technical, procedural, and other aspects are suitably adhered to in terms of national and municipal frameworks and requirements. The guide is quite comprehensive, but still a work in progress. It means that clarifications and more details are added as we progress. The guide focuses A. on the aspects under municipal control, and B. does not cover standard processes already in place. Furthermore, legislation and regulations are added or changed and might not be included in the guide. Let us look at how the document is arranged. There are three high-level sections, which will be discussed at a high level in the rest of this video. Section 1 contains the general overview and context to private generation in the network. Section 2 contains the detail. It is the heart of the document, where the different steps are provided. Section 3 contains background information that is useful for financial and billing aspects. Section 1 contains the general overview and context to private generation in the network. In terms of background, there is the purpose of this document, size categories, and assumptions regarding distributor capabilities. It provides a high-level overview of the process. The regulatory overview covers licensing and registration aspects, as well as grid code and other authorizations, especially in the context of municipalities, such as own procurement processes and lifecycle costing aspects. The document's primary purpose is to support municipal distributors with assessing applications for the connection of generators 1 megawatt and larger. It provides a process to be followed to enable generator applications and connections in the form of a list of steps to follow. A guideline to assess the network capacity is also provided, which will soon be replaced with an updated guide. The role of the distributor in the grid code compliance process is discussed, along with the most important regulatory processes relating to the connection of embedded generators larger than 1 megawatt. We already said it also provides useful information to prospective generators or customers regarding what is permissible, as well as the various criteria and processes that are involved in considering these applications. It allows the customer to understand the process that the distributor will follow, including a checklist that the distributor uses to assess the entire process. Regarding grid code compliance and grid impact studies, there is significant guidance. However, based on experience, RETEC should be consulted in all cases to ensure that the latest requirements are met in the correct manner. The overview of the regulatory processes is also useful to customers. The next important point is that this remains a guideline. As such, distributors may modify, add or remove steps and requirements as is necessary according to their operational requirements, as long as the national requirements are always met. The regulatory overview addresses the following aspects: the general rights and obligations of distributors and generators or customers, NERSA licensing or registration, feasibility of the project, ERA Section 34 determination, other regulatory requirements. There's a separate video on the regulatory requirements as well. Next are the size categories as defined in the grid code for renewable power plants. Category A, up to 1 megawatt, is covered by the standard SSEG processes covered in previous trainings. Many of the technical requirements are dealt with in the NRS 097-2 series of documents. The focus of the current training is to consider plants above 1 megawatt, in other words, category B and C. Although the majority of embedded generation connecting to municipal distributors are expected to be in category B, category C aspects are also covered. Note the split of category B at 5 megawatt. This is not part of the renewable power plant grid code, but it's included in the battery energy storage facility connection code. In the RPP grid code, some requirements such as power quality is also split at 5 megawatt and is therefore reflected in this document. Note that while some regulatory documents classify generators according to their apparent power rating, kilovolt ampere, megavolt ampere, others classify them only based on their active power output, so kilowatt or megawatt. In many instances, the two can be used interchangeably. However, it's recommended for consistency that municipalities communicate with prospective generators and customers based on the active power output of the generator, with the understanding that the reactive power range shall meet the applicable requirements of the grid code, and the apparent power shall remain within the rating of all associated equipment and applicable grid code category requirements. An overview of the process is provided as an additional video, but basically 9 steps are followed. The first step, the customer submits an application which contains a bit more information than the SSEG application form. This is then evaluated by the distributor. The evaluation process will partly be discussed, but a large part forms its own training. The distributor can only then provide a quote for the customer to connect to the grid, along with updated agreements and requirements. The quote typically covers any equipment or updates that's required by the distributor to ensure a technically viable and safe connection to the grid. Following on additional requirements, new connection agreements, and possibly a few others, will be required to be entered into between the distributor and the customer. Design refers to both parties doing the detailed design to ensure both the network and the new generation plant meets the technical and safety requirements. Similarly, construction refers to the phase where the new infrastructure is being built. Commissioning is briefly discussed, focusing on the aspects that the distributor should review and/or sign off on. Grid code compliance is step 8. It focuses on the generator requirements and specifies where the distributor is involved. Finally, the authorization closeout is discussed. Municipal owned or owned procurement can follow the same basic steps of this guide. However, there are aspects not covered and may exceed the capacity of many municipalities. The regulatory implications are discussed in the video on the regulatory framework. 4 key other aspects are listed under other considerations. If the customer installs a system for self-consumption only, it is known that the impact on the network is reduced, since it is unlikely that the size of the system exceeds the NMD. However, grid impact studies are still recommended. The primary benefit is that when export blocking is installed, the normal consumption meter can be retained and a 4-quadrant meter is not yet required. Peak load in a power system context refers to the load during peak demand. dispatchable or partially dispatchable embedded generation should be encouraged, since they can support a peak load similar to thermal generators. This could include generators having some form of storage. Where an application for an embedded generator is in addition to an existing system, and the total system size exceeds 1 MW, the entire process should be followed for the total size. For example, an existing installation of 600 kW applies to double the capacity. It is not a new application for 600 kW, but an application for 1.2 MW, and the customer and distributor needs to follow the entire process listed in the guide. Ancillary services refer to any function provided by grid-connected generators that assist the network in some way. For example, voltage or frequency control, as well as curtailment and reserve margin support. All these requirements are in the RPP grid code, but not all have been enforced operationally. The appropriateness of embedded generator installed for self-consumption to comply with these requirements is under debate, and future regulatory revisions may modify such requirements. Any customer wishing to install such a generator should inquire with the system operator and/or NERSA about these requirements as part of their process. In the interim, should ancillary services be required beyond standard generator capability requirements, as listed in the grid code, these will be contracted specifically by the system operator. The customer should consider lifecycle costing in their feasibility assessment. The key aspects that are often omitted are maintenance and other operational costs, as well as decommissioning, removal, and site restoration costs. The latter, including financial provision for these tasks, would typically be included in the environmental management plan. It's the distributor's prerogative to request these details. However, it's also a requirement of distributors for their networks in terms of the distribution code. A critical assumption is that a process is already in place for SSEG, in other words, generators below 1 MW, since this guide adds on to that existing process. If your municipality does not have such an SSEG process in place, please reach out to Sustainable Energy Africa to assist in getting it in place. You are also referred to the institutional capacity implications on page 20 of the guide document. You are encouraged to pause the video now and look at it, or look at it at the end of the video. Section 2 discusses the steps in the municipal process in detail. According to the distribution code, a customer is a person or legal entity that has entered into an agreement with a distributor for the provision of distribution services. An entity may be an embedded generator, another distributor, an end-use customer including generators, an international customer, a retailer, or a reseller. In terms of the guide and this training, a customer is often referred to as a generator, since we are dealing with customers who want to or do install generation. The 9 steps previously mentioned for the next video are discussed in more detail in section 2, the heart of the document. Section 3 considers the financial and billing aspects of these embedded generators. There are 3 sections covering the immediately important aspects relating to the financial impact on the distributor. The topic of finances are also quite vast and dealt with in other specialist training. The 3 sections covers the impact on tariffs and the new tariff structures that are required, the impact on metering and billing, where the billing database is most likely the bottleneck. Budgets and quotes also consider master planning aspects, as well as the distributor needs to define what costs the customer or generator will be responsible for. A checklist of all the aspects in the document is also provided and sorted in the same order as the steps in section 2. This will be discussed and referenced during the course. You can find it on page 57 of the guide. The Guide for Municipalities on Processing Embedded Generator Applications 1 MW and larger is a comprehensive document, but may still not cover all aspects. It is primarily intended for distributors, but customers may also find useful information. Users of the guide, but customers especially, are advised to ensure that all regulatory, technical, procedural and other aspects are suitably adhered to in terms of national and municipal frameworks and requirements. It covers the steps in detail in Section 2, with additional information for context of Category B and C embedded generators in the municipal environment, as well as the considerations for the impact on the financial aspects of the municipality in Section 3. We will discuss any questions and comments during the Q&A session. If you have not done so, take a minute and jot down the questions you have. Also look for additional information under the Materials tab and prepare for the quiz at the end of the day.